All right, let's do this. Welcome to the Witcher Lorecast, the show that explores the vast lore behind the Witcher games, show, and books. Welcome back, Witchers. This is the Witcher Lorecast. I'm your host, Tom, or Robots, with my good buddy, the man of all the knowledge on the continent, in his brain right now, Toasty. Toasty, how'd you get such a big brain?
I didn't. It's like it's in there, but don't mean I can just pull it at will.
Okay.
We've proven that. You can attest to that.
Dude, I do a bunch of different Lorecasts, and at any moment, if somebody was like posts something on Discord and is like, hey, what about this one thing about this thing in this one particular part of the game here? And I'm just like, I know what you're talking about, but you have to look it up. Like, it doesn't all sit in there. You're right. It doesn't all sit in there at the same time because sometimes it's, brains. Welcome back to the show, friends. We're talking about brains today. No, actually, we're talking about a very specific group. Toasty, who are we covering?
We're covering the Aen Seidhe today.
Aen Seidhe. When I read this in the show notes, my brain immediately went to Auld Lang Syne, which doesn't sound anything like it, but the fact that the words are funny gave me that association. And then I was going to make a joke about the song, but I was like, that's too much of a stretch. That's not funny at all. So I bailed on that one. So you're welcome. Toast's just brushing his chin. He's just like, all right, okay. All right, so
it's
the Aen Seidhe,
I got to do something.
The Aen Seidhe is a fancy elven name for
the particular elves that inhabit the continent.
So we're talking like a specific group of elves.
Yes.
And I have a feeling there's a lot to dig into on this one. So why don't we kick this off? Where do we start? Where do we even start when we're talking about an entire group of people?
We start with the entire group of people.
We just talk about all of them simultaneously.
Yeah. So we start with just in general, the elves. Elves are one of the humanoid races that inhabit the continent. They form a major part of the elder races, along with the dwarves and gnomes. Elves believe that they were created unlike humans who evolved. For this reason, some elves consider humans to be little more than hairless apes.
That's so interesting because...
Which is, if you think about evolution...
Oh yeah,
are we not?
Yeah, sure. But you could say we're waterless fish. All the links in the chain add up to something, right? But man, that's so interesting that like in the world of the continent, science has progressed to the point where like the human communities, or at least the mages and those knowledgeable, would say like, okay, there's evidence for this, right? Like, but the elven community still doesn't hold that they're like, no, we come from a very specific source. We were created. This is who we are. This is who we've always been. And even with the conjunction of spheres, that whole mixing up of the two, there's still there's still enough evidence for the humans to be like, yeah, before we showed up on the continent, we were still evolving somewhere else, which is interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah. That's like kind of one of the things I like about this universe is just the fact that like you have magic, but like you also have science, and there's like
our own world
hand in hand most of the time,
like the real world.
Exactly like the real world, Tom. Just like the real world. Aside from the Aen Seidhe, there exists another group of elves called the Aen that inhabits another world. So elves are divided into different like subspecies or subraces.
And we talked about this a little bit on the whole conjunction of spheres that went back at the beginning of the show.
And we did talk more about this as well as like with the Wild Hunt episode. Elves are capable of interbreeding with humans, thus producing half elves, quarter elves, and dryads. Though elves are incredibly long-lived, only young elves are fertile. Thus, elven populations tend to reproduce at a slower rate than humans.
Interesting. I wonder if I don't think we've gotten this in any of the books or any of the content, but I wonder if there's like an age, like humans are the same way, right? Like like women after a certain age can't produce children, but that's about the end of the midlife section of your life, you know?
But like, when does that is different? Because elves can live for like much longer than humans can. So like, at what point is what is young? Like, is the first century, is that young?
Right.
Or is it like actually like up to like, you know, the same age as humans, and then after that, but they still live for the next like 300 years of like, how does that work?
Yeah, I don't think we get any specifics on that, but it would be interesting to know more.
As for appearance, characteristic features of elves include pointed ears and small identical teeth without cuspids or canine teeth.
So no pointy ones.
No pointy ones. They don't need them. Elves tend to be very tall and lean, and due to their longevity, often appear youthful. Elves are often considered attractive by humans. Like humans, elves choose to wear a variety of different clothing styles, although Scoia'tael are known to favor furs and hides, particularly those of squirrels and other forest-dwelling creatures.
Which is part of where they get the name, right? It's because Scoia'tael means squirrels.
Squirrels.
Yeah.
They are also known to wear makeup, itself being an elven invention.
So the humans didn't invent makeup in the world. That's so interesting.
Yeah. Or the elves were at least the first ones to invent it on the continent, so they get the credit for it. Aen Seidhe are generally tall, but shorter than the Aen, as well as more slim and fine than humans. They have slender faces with strong cheekbones. Most common hair colors are black, blonde, and ginger red, but others like white occur as well. Eyes are often green or blue, but unusual colors appear more commonly than among humans. Sometimes they have an epicanthic fold, but not always. So that is, I actually looked that up. So it's a fold of skin that of the upper eyelid and like the inner corner, most often seen in like people of like Asian descent.
Yeah, it's why typically you've got in Caucasian circles, people would say like, oh, Asians have slanty eyes. And that was like a racial thing, right? It was a very rude thing to say. But it's because their eyes are actually designed differently. The shape of their eye isn't so much different so much as the deposit of like flesh around the edges.
Yeah, so they have more like skin kind of like on the inside here. And so it gives that appearance.
Yeah.
For culture, the elven culture places an emphasis on naturalism and living in harmony with the land rather than bending it to one's will. Urban elves tend to be very scholarly and artistic, but can take up a variety of professions just like humans. Rural elves that do not live amongst humans live a somewhat simpler lifestyle, hunting, gathering, and living off the land as needed. In battle, elven warriors favor bows and metal swords, as well as light armor made out of furs and hides. They tend to be skilled at sword fighting from horseback.
So pretty common stuff, you know, like they fit in well with nature. They, use typical weapons, nothing too out there when it comes to that stuff. I mean,
we see this like fairly often, I think, in like other representations of elves too, and things. So language. Most elves speak Elder Speech, the traditional language of the Aen Seidhe. Almost all elves have at least a rudimentary familiarity with common speech, but many, particularly city-dwelling elves, speak the common tongue just as well as any other human.
Yeah, it's been a long time since the conjunction at this point. Like, the cultures have kind of melded enough that language is just what people... It's the thing that you speak commonly around the people you live with. So, yeah.
As for technology, which is kind of like a new thing for me, I never actually like looked into it. It appears many elven clans in the north have a tradition of hunting, gathering, as elves of Dol Blathanna are unfamiliar with agriculture and concepts such as crop rotation. So I was familiar with this. It's mentioned in at the Edge of the World story because the elves, like, they tell like Geralt that they don't know how to like
manage a farm. Right.
Yeah. And that's part of what they were doing. That like they were kind of Teruvio was like finding out that for them, and they were going to like attempt it on their own kind of thing.
That's really interesting. You would think that would be something that you would learn from the humans. I mean, I guess there might be kind of a I don't know, a certain arrogance there of like, well, it's a human invention. Why would we need it? Right. So they're not going to do it. But
well, they've always like, that was kind of this goes back to like their naturalistic like culture of like, they live off the land, but they're like in a way of like not taking more than they need. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the humans adapted, took over land and would like take a surplus of things, and that gave them less of the land to live off of. And so of course, you know, you have to adapt or die most of the time,
like in the real world
like this. Yeah. Though many are now destroyed, elves were once capable of making great cities and palaces out of stone, but they did not make castles or fortresses. However, by the time of the 13th century, many of these settlements had long been destroyed or occupied and altered by humans. Elven bows are renowned for their lightweight and ease of use, and experienced hunters often favor them over human bows. A style of elven bow known as the Zephyr is shorter in arc length and formed from a composite of wood and animal sinew. The human hunter Milva claimed that though lighter than human yew-bows, Zephyrs will launch an arrow at a higher velocity and with a reduced spread of accuracy. Their arrows are often fletched with gray feathers and the shaft fluted for increased stiffness and weight reduction, resulting in almost silent shots.
So this is like a really good for getting in close with your enemy and making sure that one arrow shot like pierces. Yeah. Rather than like to, like, range distance
close. They have like so they have the or it's just fast.
A reduced so when it says a reduced spread of accuracy, does that mean like
that means it's more accurate?
It's actually more accurate. So there's less of a
when they're referring to like spread, they mean like if you have played like video games, like first person shooters, whenever you shoot the gun for a longer time, your bullets start going all over the place. It
scatters like the circle of area spread. Potential increases.
So this is basically, they make it to where it's like a smaller, like much more accurate essentially. They could, and it's a higher velocity, so it could travel farther. They could basically like snipe from range with these kinds of things. So
I gotcha. That sounds like, so they're like the snipers of the ranged weapons of the Witcher world, basically.
Mm-hmm. Elven arrowheads consisting of 3-edged razor sharp blades that bored in like a screw and created major internal damage.
Oof. That sounds terrible.
I mean, isn't that the point of like that's just how technology advances in our world too? Like,
right. Well, isn't one of the reasons why, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, one of the reasons why arrowheads are shaped the way they are is not only just so that they pierce going in, but that when you pull them, you have to pull them out. And when you pull them out, they do a lot more damage coming out than they did going in.
Yeah, the bladed arrowheads in particular, like they catch. So you have to like push them all the way through in order to.
Yeah, that's no good.
Elves created magnificent towns and palaces before the arrival of humans to the continent, destroying many of them following conflicts, as they did not wish for elven architecture to fall in the hands of humans. Many modern human cities, including Novigrad, Oxenfurt, Mitsima, Tredogor, Maribor, Sidaris, and the city of Sintra, are built on the ground of destroyed elven cities. Many elves and half-elves have managed to integrate into human society, but are still faced with prejudice on a day-to-day basis. Others have chosen to live in the wilds in secluded clans, living off the land and avoiding all contact with humans if possible.
This is another. I've been joking a little bit about some of the real world stuff, like magic and stuff, but the concept of one like nation or people group taking over another nation or people group and then reusing the sites where the cities were is very, very historically accurate. Like there's a reason why that city was put where it was. Chances are it's because of the natural resources nearby, access to water, defensibility, like those kinds of things. So if it's already a good place for a city, even if you burn the place down, it makes sense to put another city on top of it, which is why archaeologists are able to find such long lasting amounts of history under certain city locations. By just digging deeper, you're actually getting to previous versions of the people in the cities that lived there. That's actually pretty cool because it's so realistic.
It's actually because it's interesting to think, because like you see that, I feel like you see that a lot in like fantasy settings of like, you know, building on top of like what was there before, or like, you know, or just inhabiting locations of places that were not as much. Like, I know, I mean, my reference for here, like Skyrim, I think the city of Markarth is like a fully dwarven built city. Yeah. And the humans just took it over after the Dwemer disappeared. Yeah. So it was like, you see that concept, but like modern world, we don't really like do that. Like we find the ancient like cities and we're like, okay, we're going to preserve this now.
Well, yeah. Well, some cultures still do. Like there's a lot of destruction of ancient stuff in the Middle East, for example. Like there are places in Iraq that we as Westerners cannot travel to. And there's a lot of historical stuff that's either been destroyed by some of the groups there that disagree with their history. They want to say that things didn't happen the way the sites show that they did. So, or they've resettled those locations and with different groups. But like the city of London, for example, you can still see the Roman architecture in some of the buildings that are around. And like if you own property in London, you might, you know, own a little plot of land or a little home or something. And then you decide, oh, I'm going to dig into the ground in order to run some, you know, some wires or some pipes or something. And then all of a sudden you realize like, oh, there's actual like remains of like Roman stuff down here, including like dead bodies or, you know, structures that were previously on that same exact location. It's really cool. It's really cool when you can find out more about that kind of thing. The idea that like civilizations are living on top of ancient civilizations is just kind of a really interesting concept. In the United States, it's not as much like that because the people groups that were here didn't have established cities the way that we did. And if we kicked them off their land, it wasn't like we were also burning down, you know, stone structures, because most of them didn't build stone structure buildings. But there are still, you know, Native American burial areas that you can find and places like that that have been kind of built over.
Because we're only like 500 years old in comparison to like many other places in the world that are like thousands.
Right. And the people groups who were here before us, the Native Americans, were much more, they lived much more like the elves did. They were more, you know, in sync with the land and not building up city locations the way we do.
Yeah. As for religion, elves once, before humans arrived on the continent, worshipped a deity similar to Melitala in that they worshipped a goddess of harvest and fertility.
That's it. That's all we know, huh?
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So it's like they've almost been erased by the time of the events of, you know, Geralt living in the world. For the most part, the elves are relegated to kind of the corners of society. And so much, you know, you have to wonder how much of their history has been lost as well. You know, like
I actually get to a point of that, like too, with later when we talk about like kind of the history of stuff or whatever. Yeah. Like, I mean, with here, like the examples they give, like they've willingly destroyed pieces of their culture to avoid them being taken over by humans. Right. Like that's how, I guess, how precious it is to like, can you like imagine that? Like, your culture being so sacred to you that you would rather destroy it than someone else have it?
Yeah, I think it's also part of maintaining control, because if you decide to get rid of it, at least you made the decision than it being taken from you, you know? Yeah, interesting stuff. I love when fantasy worlds are designed in ways that are very, you know, plausible, realistic. Well, all right, we need to get to the history stuff, but before that, we have to thank our patrons. So why don't we go do that, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to the Witcher Lorecast.
That's not the right button.
Very well. Let us get this over with. Something has infested my vineyard.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let me go prepare my something oil then.
Patrons, this is where we get to thank you guys and remind you, those of you who are tier 4 or higher, that next week is our Patron episode. It's coming up quick. It is the end of the month. A Sunday, a week from Sunday is the last day of the month, which means upcoming Monday, the 25th, is the last Monday of the month. So if you want to join us, make sure that you can do so 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific, Monday night. And if you haven't already signed up on the Patreon, but you want to join us for one of these live chats, then now is the time to do it. You still got time to get in before the actual live chat happens. But thank you so much to all of you, all 16 of our patrons currently, and to our 3 higher vampires, Ben of Temeria, Vita Bjornen, and Bane the Hospital Guy. Thank you so very much. You guys get shout outs every week. Man, we would love to have more of you guys join us on the guest shows, because those are so much fun. Toasty, we haven't really begun speculating about, or at least brainstorming, I guess would be a better word, about what the topic will be this week. But guys, let us know if you have some ideas, things you want to discuss. Feel free to shout some stuff out on the Discord.
Look, guys, you gotta come up with a topic, or else Tom's just gonna pitch some random idea that slowly devolves into monster fucking. Okay, like you gotta give us something so that we can actually move on from the tradition we have established.
Yeah, unless that's really what they secretly like.
I mean, that's what I secretly like.
So there's that. But thank you to all of our patrons. You guys are amazing. Also, another way to help us out is to leave ratings and reviews. I didn't mention patreon.com/Witcher Lorecast. That's the website if you want to go to it. But you can also leave ratings and reviews. We don't have any new ones this week either. So if you like the show, you want to help us out, leave us a 5-star review with some words on Apple Podcasts. Even if you don't listen on Apple Podcasts, if you have an Apple Podcast account, you can still log in and drop a review. And you can also rate the show on Spotify. Both are wonderful places and wonderful ways to help support us. And I think this is probably the best way to help support the show. Just go tell a friend. Find somebody who plays The Witcher or enjoys the TV series or is super into the books and say, hey, check out this podcast. All right, let's move on with the rest of the show.
You smell of death and destiny, heroics and heartbreak.
It's onion.
Right, yeah.
Ben in chat says, I'll start brainstorming, LOL.
You said that last time, Ben.
So, Ben, this is on you. If we end up with a really dumb topic next week, it's not my fault. It's Ben's fault.
It's Ben's fault.
He wears the shorts.
We want everyone on the podcast to know that.
Yep.
Everyone go yell at Ben in the Discord.
This responsibility is squarely, man, words are hard, squarely on Ben's shoulders.
At least you can wear those shirts to work, Ben. I can't. I just saw it. I clicked over to the stream just to see. Words is hard.
Words is
Good
hard.
job.
Yeah, words is hard. All right, so let's talk about their history. History of the elves on the continent. What do we know?
We know some things.
Tell me things.
The elves arrived on the continent on their white ships during the Age of Migration, 2,000 years before the arrival of humans. For 1,000 years, the elves colonized much of the continent, mostly through peaceful means, though they did clash with several races such as Brands, Werebubs, and Dwarves. Werebubs. One day. We'll talk about those one day.
Werebubs. They've got to be cute, right? They're like cute creatures.
I think I've seen a picture. I think they're
Werebub.
I think they're fairly cute.
I feel like I want a werebub as a pet. I'm looking this up while you talk. Bub.
Taking control of the Vrani city of Loch Muin. They later established several settlements and towns across current-day Northern Realms. In the years immediately following the first landing, the elves either tended to ignore humans or tried to start peaceful relationships. One such example being when they took a group of human children to be trained in magic in Loch Muin. Later, after the massacres carried out by Marshal Milan Rupenek, they started to leave their settlements, hoping that the march of humanity would stop at least, which of course it did not.
Of course it did not.
Eventually, Dol Blathanna and certain parts of modern-day Kaidwen became one of the last free habitats of the Aen Seidhe. The elves who did not flee were rounded up and moved to reservations or forced to assimilate. So
this feels all too real.
Some very Native Americans, there's
a lot of similarities, especially from a writer who isn't, of this or that culture, of either modern day American culture or Native American culture, who these topics come up in our history classes and stuff, right? Because we live here. For somebody who lives on a different continent to be drawing inspiration for characters from something that happened in a very different place, pretty cool.
I mean, we know research was done. He'd be doing his research, a lot of it. So, because I don't imagine he grew up on all of the tales of Slavic folklore monsters. He might have, maybe. I don't imagine.
Maybe I have a feeling that kind of stuff like works its way into kind of the fabric of your culture. Like, it's not the kind of thing where you're like, oh, I went to bed and old Nana told me the story of, Grindelwald, the baby eater, again, to put me to bed, or whatever. But I feel like those kinds of stories are just kind of underneath in the culture. The same way that like in like Western European folklore is still underneath in American culture. The idea of like werewolves and vampires and those kinds of things that have made it more into our popular culture.
Around the 1600, or sorry, I read the number wrong. The 1060s, elven youth led by Aelirin rose up against human rule despite their elders' warnings. Contrary to their ancestors' advice, these rebels destroyed any palaces and cities they could not defend in order to prevent them from falling into human hands, like dozens of elven settlements before. The rebellion was quashed, and most of the young elves were killed as the elders had predicted. This drastic reduction in their numbers also led to threatening the future of the elven kind, because it was a bunch of, like you said before, only the young ones are fertile, and a ton of them were put to death in this rebellion. So all that was really left was the elders, and of course, not really able to reproduce there.
Yeah. So this is still a considerable amount of time in the past from the current events, because we're talking like the 1060s?
I think we're in the 12s right now.
I'm looking it up because I had the question 12s. Of that, because we dance around these numbers depending on which thing we're talking about and when it happened in the books and wherever. So for example, the short story Sword of Destiny takes place in 1262. So that's kind of a solid connection point, right? So this begins like the story about like Radovid and the Nilfgaardi Empire invading the Northern Kingdoms, the First Northern War, all of that stuff. That's 1263.
And Witcher 3 starts in 1272.
Yeah. So this is 200 years before all of those events.
Mm-hmm. A few attempts to improve interracial relations were later taken. One of the greatest advocates of the idea of proximity and coexistence was Cregennan of Laud, a mighty human sorcerer. His plans were disrupted by humans who accused him of treason because of his marriage to Lara Doran, an elven Seidhe. Words are hard. Seidhe, which I'll just talk about that like real quick, because there's not very many. There's only like 5 that we know about. Basically, they were just elves that possessed like magic skills, and like were kind of like oracles or sages. So they had like a lot of, they had like a lot of like knowledge and prophetic abilities.
So did they hold like a specific place in the culture where they kind of held up for that, or were they ostracized for it? Because usually it's one or the other.
They usually, I think it was like held up, because we only know of, I guess it just depends on the situation, because a few of these are a bit different. I mean, we know Lara Doran, she's kind of like a legendary, she is a legendary figure.
Shows up on the show. I mean, we get like a whole scene with, her wackiness towards the end of the season. Yeah.
There's some other people, Oberon, Muirstok, Ida Imayan ap Sivni, Simlis Fin ap Deber, and a more familiar name for some people, Avalok.
It's probably it's just easier to say.
Yeah, it's easier to say, and he's in The Witcher 3. He's the elf that Ciri travels with a lot. So it's kind of like specific talent for these kinds of things. And they were kind of considered like another sub race, but a lot of people got them confused because they generally got formed into this misconception of like just like wise elven sages kind of thing, which didn't make you an Aen Seidhe. You Like there was very particular.
So they were genetically different. If we speak like gene wise, I wonder how.
We know that,
right?
I mean, like Lara Doran, like being the progenitor of like the elder blood, like in Ciri's line, we don't really see that as like a prominent example in everyone else's, you know? So
yeah, so that does solve some of that, especially because the show doesn't explain it very much. This idea that like, if she was this ancient elf and everybody, you know, is it just because she was an old elf, like from a long time ago, or they used to be more powerful? But the idea that like she is like factually different
race,
right,
like
than the rest of them,
different to the other elves,
and that they're very rare. That
the couple was ambushed near Foam, and Cregennan was murdered. Lara managed to escape, but died alone after Queen Sarah of Redania refused to help her.
Freaking Queen Sarah.
You know,
I don't really know who that is.
Don't trust those Redanians, dude. They suck.
Right?
This infuriated the elves and triggered another war, which ultimately led to the conquest of Dol Blathanna by Ader. The conflict fostered racial tension that continued through the 13th century. Another chance for independence came along in the 1260s when the Nilfgaardian Empire reached Amel and began its invasion of the Northern Realms. Elves throughout the north started to form Scoia'tael commandos together with dwarves and halflings. The Scoia'tael established close cooperation with the Imperial military and Secret Service during the Second Northern War, taking part in a number of operations and massacres against Nordlings. The chaos of war allowed them to retake Dol Blathanna and make it an independent realm with Enid Angliana, or Daisy the Valley, Francesca Fendevire, as the ruler. The Vrihid Brigade, a division of the 4th Horse Cavalry, consisted solely of elves, was also formed.
Cool. So now we're up to like current events, them working with the Nilfgaardians against the human kingdoms, all of that stuff.
Yep. In accordance with the arrangements outlined in the Peace of Sintra, Dol Blathanna maintained its autonomy, though Enid, or Francesca, was forced to swear fealty to King Dimavend III. 32 Vrihid officers were handed over to the Nordlings, who were supposed to judge them fairly and grant them amnesty. It is known, however, that at least some of them were brutally murdered.
As they do. Those humans.
This next part is considered not canon to the books. Treated unfairly by humans, elven commandos continued to fight, though in smaller and smaller numbers. Some of them joined Saskia and Vergin, believing in her idea of a country without prejudice, tolerant of all nations and races.
Yeah, but now we're getting to game stuff.
Video game territory.
Yeah.
That part specifically considered not aligned with canon. And then for the last part, sometime before the 1370s, so way like in the future, Ard Gaiath opened during the Second Conjunction, and all the Aen Seidhe left the world. Before leaving, however, the elves destroyed or took with them all their cultural heritage, such as paintings. So,
surprise, there's another conjunction, and the elves all leave?
I'll leave.
They're just like, screw you guys, we're out of here.
I mean, they haven't exactly been doing that great for themselves here. They might as well.
Yeah, that's
like,
really...
There's so... Like, we know there's so many other spheres out there. Like, you know, you just have to, like... You keep going until you find, like, a good one, right? Like...
Right. I mean, that's such a big thing to put in the timeline. I mean, I know none of the books take place during or after this, right? But the idea that like if you were to expand the literature out from here, that's like a huge difference. Like it's rare that you see like gigantic drastic changes like that in the nature of like a fantasy world. Like, yep, now there's no elves on the continent anymore. Or if they're you know, very rare and they decided to come back or something. It's very substantially different than like the tone of everything else up to that point.
Yeah. As for inspirations for the Aen Seidhe, they're likely based on the light elves in Norse mythology and the Seelie Court of Fairies in Scottish folklore. Their name is also inspired by the Aelsi, older form of Aes Seidhe, a nation of fairies and elves in Irish mythology who live in a parallel world from humans.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff is the same core inspiration that authors like J.R.R. Tolkien took when including elves and these other fairy races into his works. So I have to wonder how much of this was like, so much of fantasy after Tolkien is very Tolkien inspired. So the idea that like in The Lord of the Rings, you've got elves who live much more closely with nature. They have more natural magic abilities, those kinds of things. Does the inspiration for these stories go back directly to that? Or is it jumping back to the same core material? Or is it just a mix of both? You know, like at some point you can't even make the distinction. You're like, well, I'm familiar with these other works. To say that they did or didn't inspire me is like, well, was I actively thinking about it at the time when I wrote this? Or is it just kind of, again, the framework underneath everything when you're just thinking general fantasy?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm not, I obviously don't know. I mean, we know how much like research and efforts like put into like, you know, doing these books and whatnot. I imagine like, and that's kind of in that general area. Like we know that, Andrzej Sapkowski like drew a lot from like Slavic mythology, and then like Norse mythology and some of like Irish, or I guess like those Isles mythology. And then, you know, I guess he like seemingly added a bit of like history from like, you know, the US and stuff. So definitely a multicultural like things that are being added in there. I mean, just the idea of like, you know, well, I guess that wasn't his design, so never mind. I'll refrain.
Yeah. Well, I think at some point, if you're just well read, if you just understand history and you've read a lot and you are well informed, then any ideas you're gonna put out are going to be combinations of those other ideas that are already floating around in your head, right? So to say like, I specifically took this idea from this place is probably much more rare than as an author than just like, yeah, this thing, I made this thing, and now that I made it, there are similarities to these other things. Because it all just kind of mixes up in your head by the time it comes out as an author.
And we know that there's like blending of these different elements and things between different like cultures. Mm-hmm. You know, prime example, like Greek and Roman, there's so many similarities there. Like sometimes it comes hard to like pick out like which in particular, other than the names, is strictly to which, you know, set of mythology there. So
right. Yeah. Everything's kind of just interconnected. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So man, this has been really cool, getting into the elves here and just the distinction and how they're different from the humans and their whole plight, their whole story kind of encapsulated in one episode. I think it would be really cool to speculating about the Witcher 4 game. If it takes place in the future, after the elves leave, then like how is that going to work? Like
that would be very strange.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean like that they don't come back or that some of them don't visit or that some other crazy event doesn't happen. Like who's to say a third conjunction doesn't occur? Like it seems like the first conjunction it seems more chaotic. It seems like one of those things that just kind of dropped people off in worlds that they weren't expecting to be in. That's the tone of it that I get from it. I don't know if that's
smaller
accurate.
Scale of like the Big Bang Theory, like generally is kind of how I think about it. Like where, like, granted, we knew these things existed before, but like they collided into each other and like, you know, kind of formed into a new thing. So like magic-y Big Bang kind of thing.
The sense I get is that I'm sure there were some very powerful individuals who knew about the conjunction, understood how to traverse realms, and did it on purpose. But I also get the feeling that like for humanity, that they were just kind of dumped off into a new world.
Yeah, well, I mean, like that's kind of because the magic came from the conjunction,
right? So
like they didn't like this stuff. We don't know a whole lot about like what things were like before.
Yeah,
but like I mean, if you know, we're told that magic came from the conjunction. So like, I don't know if there was anybody who would have like been able to predict something like that, because it's a very like,
at least not on the realm that the continent is on, right? Like if you came from another magic realm, like where the elves were, or like some of the elves are on these other planes, right? These other, I don't know even what to call them, other realms, other
but
universes.
we don't like it because we don't like the nature of the conjunction. We don't know if magic existed on other realms, or if it came like because of, or the act of them, like these spheres colliding with each other is what, like the force that came off of it is magic and what created it in the first place.
Or if maybe like it was latent, but it was released by the conjunction. Like it's always been here, but it was not active. You know, there's that kind of theory. But yeah, back to my point though, it seems to me more like humans were just kind of dumped off from one place into the continent. Like I get this picture of like portals popping up and just people falling out of them and going like, crap, where am I? How am I going to survive?
The same idea with the elves. That's how the elves arrived, because they weren't here. They got dumped off in the conjunction, and the humans were later to arrive, and we're not sure exactly what happened with them. The assumption is that they are, yes, they were dumped as well, but they sailed from some distant land to the continent. So we don't know if like humans inhabited a different part of this world, or like they were dumped off, or both. Right.
But in contrast to that first conjunction, which seems like just kind of a stirring up and mixing around of peoples, the second one doesn't have that kind of chaotic flavor to it. Like it seems like the elves made a point and said, okay, here's our opportunity, let's leave. But we don't have like new races just popping up other places, or like whole swaths, like cities of people just all of a sudden, you know, disappearing into a portal somewhere unexpectedly, you know, at least as far as I know from the way that plays out.
I mean, that's like, yeah. So it's, gosh, it's just so long. So
yeah.
Cause I mean, sometime before the 1370s, we're 100, that's 100 years in the future from where we're at in our storyline.
Right. 2370s, right? 13, 23.
No. The
13.
Elves,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
13,
they left sometime before the 1370s.
Yeah. I'm sorry. So, I'm thinking wrong century or wrong millennia. Anyway, it would be interesting because I think you could do things with the storyline of the future of like, maybe it's not a conjunction, but it's some other thing that occurs and mixes people up and puts them in places they don't expect to be in, you know, that kind of thing.
Here's the question. Like, how far in the future do you think we might be is the question of like, because I mean, the general storyline of The Witcher is not like very many years. Like, I mean, because the books, you said that, 1263, we're in 1272 for The Witcher 3. It's like 9 years for like the entire progression of the books and the video games.
Yeah. It's not very much. I mean, you could place it anywhere after that. I mean, that's the whole thing, is that like, is it in the past? Is it in the beginning? Like so many events, if you look at a timeline, there's a lot of events that are kind of played out in the timeline as like, this thing happens here, this thing happens here, this person dies here, this person dies here, this person dies here. A lot of that stuff feels very set. So if you were to do it in the future, you'd have to take a lot of that into consideration. Whereas if you did it in the past, there's so much about the past that we just don't know. So maybe that's what the focus will be. I don't know. It's just, I don't know, speculation. Listeners, if you guys have some theories on this stuff, I'd love to hear them. Also, Ben wrote, my patron chat is the 29th Toasty. We need a topic. Oh, for your show, for Ben's show. Yeah.
For Holocron.
Yeah, Holocron Histories. Yeah, go check out Ben's show, Holocron Histories, about Star Wars. But I think that's it for this episode for us. Again, feel free to join us next week if you'd like to sign up on the Patreon. We'd love to have you and throw out some ideas. Even if you're not on the patron chat, if you want to just pitch some ideas in the Discord channel for the Witcher Lorecast, throw out some ideas. We'll consider them. Toasty, you got anything else going on you want to share before we head out?
The usual, follow us at the Witcher Lorecast on Twitter. I believe that the Cyberpunk Season 2 Episode 1 was dropped today on their Patreon. So,
which means very soon for everybody.
Very soon. I actually found out the reasoning for that, and I apologize. But apparently, during like the edit, there was some big crazy mess ups with the editing process on that. My audio was like completely jacked up. Like it was like,
Oh no.
Apparently, because I don't understand editing. Tom does on the editing on the show. But like it was so messed up. She had to basically, it was like
imitate your voice and then redo all of your lines.
Yeah. But as she was like, no, I guess my audio track was playing at like a different time in the recording than like they were.
It was the
so
desynced.
Like while we were like halfway in the episode, I was still bullshitting like at the beginning because we like mess around for a little while or whatever.
It was all desynced.
So she had to separate out my audio and try to reset it, but it kept doing that as she was trying to do it. So it's just taken her, Ariel, a really long time to get through that. But I guess she's got it. She figured it out. Seeing stuff soon. I assume it's on the Patreon based on Cass's reaction in the chat. So. Cass is over here freaking out about it. So I guess that means the episode's out, I think.
Well, cool. Go check that out. Cyberpunked. And we've got all my shows, all the different Lorecasts. Like I mentioned, the Lord of the Rings Lorecast, Fallout Lorecast, Elder Scrolls, Mass Effect. Mass Effect's coming up next. So stay tuned for that. But all that stuff over at robotsradio.net. Toasty, I just released some lo-fi tunes on Spotify. I've been making some music. And it's free for content creators to use. It's copyright free. So you're not going to get, like, if you use it as the background of your game stream, or if you use it in a video, you're not going to get copyright strikes from that. So if you guys are looking for some chill lo-fi stuff, that's the first stuff I'm putting out. I'm going to do some other types of music as well, but there's 3 songs currently available. You can add them to one of your playlists on Spotify. Just search Robots Radio. It's under Robots Radio. Also, it's called Lo-Fi for Synths. So go check that out and let me know what you think.
Lo-fi is kind of where it's at. Like I feel like most like streams and stuff you pop into, you get like a lot of lo-fi music.
Yeah, it's a real nice like background kind of chill thing to be playing in the background. So yeah, go check that out. Add it to your playlists and use it on your streams. I'd love for you guys to let me know if you're doing that. But that's what we got for this week. We'll be back next week with our patrons. And until next time, Toasty,
stay safe on the path.
See you guys later. Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Witcher Lorecast. We'd love to hear about your experiences with the games and the books and the TV series and all your thoughts on everything. Please check out the Robots Radio Discord and follow us on Twitter at Witcher Lorecast.
You've been listening to a Robots Radio podcast. Smart shows for interesting people. Check out all the shows at robotsradio.net.